Hello, everyone. Welcome to Miami Beach Urban Studios live art talk with Miami-based artist Devora Perez. I'm Colette Mello. I would like to give a special thank you to the City of Miami Beach Department of Tourism and Office of Cultural Affairs for sponsoring these art talks. Devora Perez is a Miami-based visual artist. Her grids, squares, and spatial constructions created out of industrial materials such as wood, acrylic, plastic, and cement reference the minimalist movement of the 60s. However, Devora's works have a very sensuous quality that brings to mind the works of Carmen Herrera and Zilla Sanchez. Devora Perez was part of the group traveling exhibition Sectionality, Diaspora Art in the Creole City, which started at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, D.C., and then traveled to the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, and was recently on view at the Moore Building in the Miami Design District. Devora was part of the AIM Biennial in December 2020. She also exhibited here in 2018 at the In My Mind's Eye exhibition curated by Danielle Damas. Devora holds a bachelor's degree from the New World Center of the Arts and an MFA in Visual Arts from Florida International University. She has a studio at the Laundromat Art Space. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that if you have any comments or questions, to make them through the chat function, and we will get to them throughout our conversation with Devora this evening. So hi, Devora. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see you. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Perfect. Hi. Thank you, Phillip, for inviting me for this talk. I'm super happy to be here. And hello, everyone. My heart is full seeing so many familiar names and faces. I promise that I will be respectful of your time, so I'll try to do this as quick as I can. And you know, Colette, we can do this in. Let me share first. This can be kind of fluid. I don't want to just kind of be like presenting the whole time.
Sure, we can be making interactive. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you know, if you guys have questions, you know, feel free to kind of write it in the chat, right? And Colette, you know, feel free to interrupt me as well. Let's see.
So tell us where you are now.
Oh, good. Yes, so right now I am at Laundromat Art Space. I'm in my studio. I've been here for quite a bit, maybe like 2 years, 3. I first started in the space with DVCAI. It's like right next door. And then I was lucky that I got my own studio space last year. So it's been a wild ride since then. Let's get started. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. So here I have kind of like thumbnails about my work, just overall kind of brief overview. So it's varied, I want to say, but there's like a common thread throughout my works. And I'm hoping to kind of guide you through it as well. So you also mentioned that many of the students at FIU watch these talks, and I kind of wanted to cater it to them too, just because I was in their shoes not long ago. And so it's kind of daunting, you know, dealing with, you know, school, and now the world is upside down, right? And so I kind of wanted to cater as much as I can to them and to talk about my process and just to share it all. So then I can say that in my work, I mean, I went to New York School of the Arts and I was trained as a painter, but I was always finding ways to kind of go against that, kind of blur the lines between painting and sculpture. And so there's kind of like this back and forth conversation, sometimes like a meticulous kind of experimentation where I bounce and play and go back and forth between them, right? And this kind of becomes like the vehicle through which I operate. And so there's like a lot of focus on the materials. As you can see, there's like a lot of materials that I use. So there's like an emphasis on that. But I think at the core, what I'm doing, I kind of want to make work that makes people think, right? Because I think I'm constantly thinking specifically about topics that interest me. For example, like Miami or landscape, culture, sometimes gender roles. I think about, I don't know, there's so many things, even like the history of painting, right? And landscape painting, the history of landscape painting as well. And so I'll kind of go through that as well. And so they kind of bounce off one another. So you mentioned also, you know, my first solo show that I had at MBUS, right? It was curated by Danielle Damas. And it was like a 3-part show. So it was the first part. I believe Gianna was also the second part. And then Jose Luis Garcia was like the third part. I might be switching them up. And it was, for me, it was more about like the domestic, and kind of, I guess, what I thought about in terms of layout and architecture, kind of culture, maybe even like sensory kind of memories that I guess we feel or experience in a home. And so the first work is this one. It's on the flyer. It's called Patterns of Domestic Space. And in it, I was thinking about architecture, the organization of space, and the influence of media on culture, right? And the work kind of draws upon the phrase of cookie cutter, right? Where it's kind of like all the same. And I think the grid, or like the square for the most part in my work, is pretty important, where I'm thinking about the square, the rectangle, as kind of like foundations for homes, or plots of earth, kind of like I think about materials, or like kind of these concepts, right? And so in this work, if you see the color palette that I have employed there were actually popular interior design colors for houses in the US in 2017. And so it was kind of like this, in the process of like, this kind of identical formulaic look and kind of becoming right at that point. And then the work that was right next to it is this small kind of sketch. And in the show, Danielle and I thought, it's good to kind of show people kind of insight into the process, not just like the final product, right? Which I'm kind of against that concept anyway. Where I want to say that the process begins like in the inception of the thought, the idea in and of itself, right? And here you see that I'm like in this phase, which is kind of one of my favorite phases, like sketching or drawing. I'm thinking about the work in the round. I'm thinking about, let's say, the integrity of the structure. I'm thinking about materials that I'm employing. I'm thinking about the cuts, the hardware, size, right? And throughout the PowerPoint, you'll see where I'll show the work, right? And then I'll show kind of the idea and how I kind of work through it. For the most part, if I feel like if like the sketching phase or the drawing is not enough, or I feel like I haven't fully fleshed out an idea, then I kind of go forward with kind of making a maquette or a model. And it kind of gives me like a more hands-on, just to kind of work out the kinks. And so this is kind of another installation shot of the same show, in my mind's eye. And I picked it because it was kind of like a breakaway. And I was thinking about these works being at an intersection of sort of like visual arts and architecture, but like very loosely, right? Where I'm kind of employing like flat painted zones, these constructed forms, and in ways to kind of create spaces or and create kind of like division. And sometimes like even the one all the way to the right, like even using shadows, right, to kind of create these like soft like divisions. And they're kind of loosely based off my home, right? Like how things are kind of like, I guess you could say the layout. And when I was kind of creating this PowerPoint, I thought like this is kind of like Peter Halley meets Robert Ryman, right? At this point. Another thing that I do with my process is kind of employ other materials as substitutes for paint. For example, the work all the way to the left, right, that has that ochre color. You see that tactile quality. I mean, that's not actually paint, that's caulking, right? So then I'm kind of employing like these sort of like industrial materials, but the way that I apply it is kind of like an impasto technique. And so it's like kind of like a constant kind of process that I'm doing in my work, where substituting kind of materials for paint that can be like switched for paint. This is another work that was in the show. Block of 4 colors. It's meant to hang on the wall, kind of like a painting, but also extends out of the wall, kind of like a sculpture. And I was thinking about like the basics of like home design, right? And the work, because it's like geometric, rigid, like angular, and those colors. And the work was also a play on concrete blocks, right? They're kind of like the building core materials for masonry buildings. And so it's kind of like a play on that. Then the third layer, which is kind of funny because I do these things in my mind, right? Where if I were to lay the work down, kind of like horizontal, then it looks like a maquette for like a modern kind of table, like furniture, right? And at one point I actually did blow it up because I wanted to play, and it was like an assignment. at FIU, where I blew it up and it was like 8 feet tall. I didn't like it. I thought it was too much. But there's just always this interesting concept of being able to expand and contract the work. That's also like another layer. And the last work that I'll speak about for that show is called Stepping Stones. So it kind of references stepping stones, right, in your backyard. Specifically, I was thinking about kind of sensory experiences in our homes, right? Specifically, and this is actually what you're looking at is kind of 3 concrete slabs, right, on wooden panels, and they're all treated differently so that the surface is highly tactile, right? And again, I was thinking about kind of sensory moments in the home, and in the first one, I was thinking about like when you recently vacuum carpet, that there's like these striations and mark makings and lines, right? And I think about like when you run your fingers through it. The second one, I was thinking about when you wake up in the morning and there's like your bed sheets are kind of wrinkled and crumpled. And then the last one was thinking about kind of sand between your toes, because we live in Miami and who doesn't have sand in their backyard, right?
I love all of these. You know, this is when I first was exposed to your work. I came to the opening and I was like, wow, this is so fantastic. I remember, and I love the architecture, how it went with MBUS, and we teach architecture classes here. And then, yeah, it was just really amazing. That's when I started following you.
So yeah, I do remember I did like the show, and it was a great collaboration with Danielle. I mean, it was a lot of like back and forth as we kind of, and the space was kind of quirky, right? And to find a way to kind of make it work. And I think we did a pretty good job.
No, it's a great space. I think it's awesome. The Fellows Gallery, I think we were calling it at the time. The
Yes.
Fellows Gallery is a really good space for solo exhibit and for experimenting, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so, you know, I don't know if you mentioned in the introduction, that was also part of an international exchange. And we went to a trip to Belize. And this happened during, you know, my graduate program time. And I remember I had to kind of ask for like a week off and catch up on homework afterwards. But I think for students, it's a very good idea to kind of be exposed to other places, right? To hear other people's opinions. And so for the most part, you know, I'm pretty sure everyone here knows Rosie Gordon-Wallace, right? With her Diaspora by Full Charts Incubator. And she has like years of doing this kind of international culture exchange every year to the Caribbean or just to Latin America. And that year we went to Belize, and all of that you see here, we had, you know, with Isaiah, with Boy and Michael Elliott, Onijide, Adrian Chadwick was there. She was the artist on the ground. And it was kind of between her and Rosie, they kind of like set this itinerary. And it was so jam-packed that I had a hard time kind of selecting one location that I really liked out of each kind of city. But you know, the good thing is that like I also share the link, and on their website you can also visit and see all of the past trips, right? They always document and they always catalog everything, which is amazing. And so for the first one, we went to Belize City, and it was great, memorable to hear kind of Belizean artists share about their practice, right? And here we are at the Image Factory, and it was actually founded by this man. His name is Yasser Musa, right? And he is an artist, instructor, and he's also the son of the ex-prime minister of Belize. And it was great because we were exposed to painting, like from painting to like poetry, right? Super amazing. And then the one on the right, we went to San Ignacio, we went to Mayan ruin. Amazing. It's like walking back in time, and you can see and almost feel the history, right? I can't pronounce the name, so I'm gonna butcher it. But in English, it's called the Stone Maiden, right? And if you see like these staircases, they're so steep. I mean, that because it's hard to climb. But it was beautiful to kind of be exposed to something like this. That, you know, that's forever in my memory. And kind of reaching all the way to the top, and how it was so kind of like smooth, I guess, because of weather and who knows how many years and decades of, you know. And so the other places we went to Santa Elena, right? We went to a house of culture. And there are many of the houses of culture throughout Belize. They're kind of like centers, like art centers, right? Where they look to kind of uplift the community through art and culture and of all ages. That day, we were kind of listening to students kind of present their work to us, and we were kind of doing the same thing to them. And it was wonderful. Like, these are kind of memories that like I can't forget. And I remember I went with the expectation to be like an open vessel to kind of have stories shared with me and imparted, right? And then the last memorable trip, this is at Dangriga, we went to this drum maker shop. It's pretty famous. His name is Austin. He's the man right there behind the drum. And he has like 50 years of experience of making these drums that are specific to the Garifuna tradition. What's interesting is it's only passed on to the sons, to the males, but his daughter is the one who's actually taking on that role. Her name is Theatha. And it was super like enlightening. I was super progressive too, to hear how a woman is like, she's like now like the first, like Belize's first master woman drum maker, right? That's keeping that tradition alive. So, you know, to students, I'm thinking it's always good to kind of be open. I'm also kind of for the idea of having a mentor, because they can guide you and they can teach you things. So that's also my 2 cents on that.
Devora, how did you meet Rosie? Because Rosie is and Adrian. Adrian used to be the at PAM. I think she was the head of the education department, director of education at PAM.
Yes.
And then how did you meet Rosie? Because Rosie was also at PAM. She used to be the president of the docents, and that's how I know her from that role. How did you meet her?
Okay, so it was interesting because I actually applied through a program that I heard from Pip and Gianna, which is called Art Table. And it's kind of like a blind kind of pairing where, based off your resume and what you do, they pair you with a mentor. It's like women that are in the art field, right? They're like role models.
Yeah, I was
absolutely.
Part of that. Mm-hmm.
And
it's
so,
really
and that's
good. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I thought it was great. I mean, when I first heard about it, I thought, you know what, I'm gonna give it a try. And I guess, I got really lucky that they paired me with her.
Great lucky with Rosie. She's like a wealth of knowledge. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I think it helped that I also had kind of like history of working kind of with museums or interning, like for example, like MoCA, De La Cruz, and Prism Art for at one point. And so I think that also helped to pair me with her, and kind of also my own goals and aspirations. And so it really worked out great, because she's a force to be reckoned with.
Yes.
And so talking about her, this is a show that I was part of. I'm so grateful to be part of the show. Rosie curated the show with Sethi Sanjit. He's the director of the court. Well, then director. She's not the director anymore. And this show was massive, right? Where it has about 27 artists representing 18 different countries. And it's basically about like all of like Rosie's years of creating connections with artists, again, based off her international culture exchanges every year for the past 20 plus years. And it was beautiful to be part of this project, and kind of wanted to share, what I did. This is kind of what I proposed, man-made environment here, that everywhere. And it took me about a few months to make. And I remember what I was interested in is specifically looking at the history of landscape painting, like picturesque painting of the 18th century. And there was like an issue with this, where the origin was to kind of depoliticize the displacement of people from their homes, right? How, right? Through kind of drawing these beautiful landscapes that are kind of green, luscious, and blue open skies, to kind of give the impression of like no man's land, like if people weren't, pushed out of the land and inhabiting those places. And so I thought I kind of wanted to find a way to kind of create that correlation to Miami, and specifically to Miami's issue with gentrification, right, which is still very much ongoing. And so that's kind of what the work is about, right? When gentrification happens, it's like removal of people and of local histories, right? And you're left with like nothing, right? This kind of idea of artificial. I'm sorry?
I was going to say, it's kind of like my situation here, where I've been I'm being dislocated from where I live. I think we talked about this earlier, and you said you were worried about me. Thank you for thinking about me. But yeah. So for
Yeah,
some
and
of you, I live in a building for a while now, and they just let us know that we all need to move out because of some work that they need to do, and we can't stay there while they're working on the building. So there's like 200 residents all vying for places to live right now in Miami. So it's a little bidding war going on. So
absolutely, it's terrible, and it was weighing on me. And so, going back to this work, it was kind of like my first site-specific installation, because the courtyard is a very beautiful space, but it has like these columns throughout the space, and I was thinking, how do I make this work? Because it's also very symbolic, and even the length of the work is the average height of man. Because I'm thinking, like, man has this issue of kind of dominating nature, dominating everything, and that's kind of impossible, right? And because I think like landscape like shifts and changes, and a way to kind of reflect that as well is that the work in and of itself, you're looking at like wood, plexiglass, and then asphalt clumped inside. It's not like fixed, and the work did travel to quite a few places. So every time it traveled, it kind of shifted, almost like an etch-a-sketch, right? And so you see like marks and the residue of the oil where like the valleys and the peaks once were. And I thought it was interesting how every time, so after I think Washington, I traveled to the Gantt, Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte. I wasn't able to go to that one. And I know that at one point COVID outbreak was so bad that they had to, I think you did go to it,
I
correct?
did
Right?
get to see it. I was actually, we went up to, I think in October, we went up north to the mountains, and then on the way back, we did a detour so I could see the exhibition. And it was very, not a lot of people were out, and I think there was like, just a few people in the museum, but I was very happy to see it. So is this a location? This was at the Corkyard Museum,
Yes.
this image, right? Okay.
Yes, it's because of the columns, and
Mhm.
it was beautiful because I think it added like another layer to the work, right? Like
Yes.
masculine kind of systems in place, and so it was very beautiful. But wherever it went, it kind of shifted, and I believe that in the last place that was here in the design district, the more building, Rosie decided to kind of put like a yellow background behind the wall, like on the wall behind the work, and so it also kind of added like this sort of like sunset feel. So it kind of think helped with the narrative like of like a landscape that I wasn't expecting. I thought it was a kind of great touch and decision on her part. I can, showing back to like my sketches where this is me and my process like of planning, right? Where I feel like in this case, because it was site specific, I hadn't really gone there, but I knew the layout, I knew how big the space was. I still wasn't like feeling comfortable because remember I come from a background in painting. So for the most part, everything that you've seen has been self-taught, especially if I'm using kind of materials and tools and very industrial. It's kind of me like trial and error, right? And for the most part, it's taken me like a while to kind of get the hang of it and to kind of polish my skill. And so for this work specifically, I actually went off and I created like a maquette, which is the one back here, just so that I can kind of play with like the display. I was thinking about also like hanging mechanisms because the work is actually very heavy too. And not only just the work, but even thinking about how to transport the work, having to kind of create a crate, massive crate, so that the work wouldn't be kind of flipped over, and ruin the work, right? So there's like a lot of things that have to think about.
Did you make the crate to travel, or?
No, for this one, I actually had it manufactured.
Okay.
And I kind of asked them specifically what I needed, so that, it wouldn't flip over or it would minimize these kind of issues. I didn't have time. It was like running against the clock.
But you did go to DC for the install.
I definitely did. Yeah. And it was breathtaking. It was super amazing. It was packed. And I was also even lucky of having been here, in the design district and seeing people's reaction to the work, even people that worked in the building. And this is something that I experienced myself, but people would say, oh, my country is represented. I need to see the show. I need to come back to the show. And you can see kind of like pride well up in their eyes. And I thought that's magical, right?
That's so nice.
Absolutely. And or I would often see people take their time. I mean, you could easily walk around the space quickly in a matter of like 15 minutes if you wanted to, but there were some people who actually took their time, right, to reflect and to sit and ponder these works. And that was also magical to me too. And kind of hearing their experiences where they thought it was whimsical, thought provoking. So I'm super grateful to have been part of something like this, and I can still hear, people's input. And, so that was happening also, during the graduate program. But aside from working for, this project for that show, in my mind, I was still working with my interest in painting, I guess you could say, right? One of the earliest artists that I was exposed to early on in my life was Lucio Fontana, the Italian artist, late artist. And he shook my mind when it came to painting, right? Because he exposed painting to like the spatial realm with his cuts and slashes, revealing the spaces inside, hidden between. And I thought, wow, I need to be part of this conversation. I want to be part of that conversation. And then there's another moment in time following abstract expressionism, right? Where like the theories of objects and the drip paintings of Jackson Pollock turned away from how paintings looked towards the underpinnings of how they were made. And so I was thinking about that. I said, like, what is my way of how to make a painting, right? And so this is one of those things that, it's evolved. And what you're seeing right here is, your frame, right? And here I'm kind of playing with kind of what goes first, what goes, after. And I hear use vellum where I kind of stretched it around, and vellum doesn't give way. It's not like cotton, right? Still made it work. And I thought of painting on the frame just again to turn it on its head, right? Where you're always kind of in traditional painting, you're looking at like the surface image, and everything else is kind of dematerialized and hidden under, right? And I thought, well, what's a way that I kind of play with that? So that's what I was thinking on that one, and the one on the right, again, going back to caulking, sort of employing something that's not really painting, but it's like a substitute for paint, and how I applied it as well. And these works kind of evolved to these contemporary color painting series, right? Which I love, and I'm still working on these and looking for ways to expand. Let's see. What's interesting is that I've been using colored plexi and acrylic sheets since 2013. But again, because I was self-taught, I had to, through time, to try and error, find a way to kind of polish kind of my art making. And I was thinking like, specifically now with the pandemic, right? Who hasn't been exposed to plexiglass in one way or another? And that added like another layer of current reality, right? To the point that even the prices shot up, right? I've been using this product for like years. And so it was interesting. And I thought, what's one way that I can kind of spin this? And last year I was thinking about, last year in March, we had the lockdown here in Miami. And I thought people must be missing like the Miami scene, specifically Miami Beach, I thought, right? And thinking in terms of like the sunset, the beach, the neon lights on Ocean Drive. And so these are kind of what these works are about, sort of based off of that Miami vibe. If you ask me also like about color, if it's important in my work, it is in this case specifically, just because, going back to like, I guess, our history of this country, there's like a fear of color here. And it's often associated with like the superficial, the cosmetic, the inessential, the infantile or other. And so for me, using kind of color is also like a form of resistance. And these are kind of the things that I was thinking about as well.
But you weren't using a lot of color before, right?
In some of the works, yes. In some of the work, yes. And also because, I also am a fan of Donald Judd, and Judd also used like a lot of materials and a lot of colors. And so some of the works, yes, some of them, no. And it just depended on kind of what I was interested in at the time or what I was trying to investigate. And so, I've been asked this question, like, how did I end up using like these like colored acrylic sheets, right? And the honest truth is that it's sort of tongue in cheek, because I thought acrylic paint is plastic. And this acrylic sheet is a sort of plastic too. And I thought I can opt, and change it. And so in this case, the surface and the paint become one and the same, right? And the viewer is able to see and look at the inside, right, at the frame and the spaces, so it's kind of like open. And so these are kind of like things that I was thinking about. And I'm hopeful to continue to expand this series and see where it goes.
Well, I love these. I remember I was lucky enough to do a studio visit by accident. I just happened to be at Laundromat and I ran into you and you gave me a tour. So I was very appreciative of seeing all of these. These are really wonderful.
Thank you. And then I was a part of the show last year, the biennial, and it was organized by William Cordova, Mikhail Solomon, Jean Moreno, and Mary Vickles. And we also know that Art Basel didn't happen last year because of the pandemic. But what's interesting is that, aside from all the razzle and dazzle that I think Art Basel brings, like, people tend to forget that there are artists that live and work in Miami all year round. And so I thought the timing was perfect, right? Because it was for a month and it was in the month of December. And it also spoke about the resourcefulness of artists, right? As they created like these site-specific installations all throughout South Florida. And accompanying this month-long event, there was like this printed material that you see on the right, where it kind of details all the artists included. It was like about 70, I want to say. And it also does like a roadmap, and it shows you where these installations were. For me, because it was optional, you can have it be permanent for like the month, or it can be temporal and just live, on the printed material and on the website. But for me, I kind of wanted to do something temporal, right? And so this is kind of what I proposed. It's titled Erasure and the Making. And it's a very contemplative work because I was dealing with 2020. In my mind, I'm thinking like, there's so many things that were going on in my mind, and this overview of like claiming for power structures, right? Questioning power structures, claiming for social and racial justice, seeking how we stand to kind of redefine our humanity. How do we address as a collective the environmental crisis while dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic? It's like mouthful. And I feel like it was like a lot of bombardment on all sides, and I wasn't sure where we were going. And so I feel like this is what the work is about. I thought we are here at the crossroads of erasure in the making, where, I mean, there has never been a more scarier time or more hope-filled moment than now for like a monumental shift. And so I feel like if the work kind of embodies both the tragedy and the hope, right, about where we were going. And so what you see is a sort of open structure, rectangular structure, right, that is 7 feet tall, 10 feet long, 6 feet wide. And hanging inside this wooden structure, you see these like plexiglass boxes, right? Inside, there's like these artificial landscapes. And in one, it has the asphalt, and the other one, it has concrete. And they're kind of symbolic of like the built environment. And when I'm thinking about the built environment, I'm referring to kind of what we have created, right? In terms of space, material, energy to create our communities. And the work itself almost like stands in stark contrast to nature, right? It doesn't seem like it doesn't belong there. And I thought this is pretty much symbolic for me of like the American values to the realities that we face every year or on a daily basis, right, in this country. And so that's kind of what the work was about. Super contemplative, I think, because I'm not an activist in any way. But, and then the other aspect of it is finding a way to kind of collaborate with an artist, because I'm a photographer and I had to find a way to document. So then I reached out to my wonderful artist friend, Jose Luis Garcia. And it was amazing because there was like this exchange of ideas where I told him, this is what I'm thinking, this is kind of what I want to do. What do you think? Because photography is kind of like outside my realm. But I know it's definitely his realm. And it was super funny because I think we were laughing the whole time. And at one point, I sort of became his shadow, where if he was standing, I was standing behind him. If he crouched, I crouched behind him. And you think, like, why? well, the works are highly reflective. And so we were very careful to not come out, right? It was also interesting to be able to see, like over his shoulder, what he was looking at and see kind of what angles work and how to best illustrate this. Because, I only have like, 3 photos, I think, that I can submit. And so we just thought about like, what's the best way to kind of give the person like the whole feeling of like being there. And that's kind of, this is like a detailed shot where you can see that it's so super clear and so serene, but you can again see kind of through it, and it's super reflective. And so these are kind of things that we were dealing with. And I also have images here again with like how it starts the process, right? And this work actually I made it from start to finish. It was like a month long, which I thought, wow, I really kind of learned to kind of hone my craft where I can like speed up the process. And making this work, it took quite a few sessions where we did it in front of my house, just to kind of get it right, where it could be easily assembled, and it's assembled in a matter of minutes. And it's just thinking so it's quicker, easier to kind of take apart. It's actually here in my studio. Something so big is actually taken apart in my studio, and my studio is actually kind of small. And so I was thinking about that too, and making it work in so many different ways. And so you see that I'm thinking like in the sketch, I was thinking about the size. I was thinking about like even like where to place it. On the right, you see where I'm kind of doing the math. It's like when I had to construct these like plexiglass boxes, and also thinking about kind of like hanging options, right? So that all of that was kind of part of the work, and wow, like we were able to get it done in a month.
That's really, I like that you're sharing how your process is. Now, this is the one that you did for the biennial, correct? The one
Yes.
you did for and I love these photographs. These are amazing, but these are really wonderful photographs. So the one you did for the Diaspora that traveled, how long did that one comparably? You don't have to tell me.
I'm so glad you asked this question, because I'll be honest with you. If I say that I start the process when I first make the sketch, then I can easily say that the project took me about like 2 years, because it's something that I had in my heart and I was investigating, but I didn't have either the tools, the space, the resources, or the know-how of how to kind of execute it. Again, because it's all been self-taught. What I was taught, in New World was like technical painting, right? But I wasn't really interested in that. And so it was more of like, again, trial and error, finding a way to kind of learn and to be patient with myself, right? So yes, 2 years was the average. Now I could say
you got it down to a month. That's great.
Yeah, something that it was absolutely something that was like, this is like my first large scale installation. I've never done anything this big. And also, if you remember, like last year, my class graduated, right? And it was kind of hard because, we couldn't have the MFA show, like, the physical one. We couldn't do a graduation walk. And, aside from everything else that was going on. And so for me, I thought I also wanted to challenge myself, just because I felt like if, I couldn't fully execute, like the culmination of 3 years for the program, but I thought, what's another way? And I thought this opportunity was presented. And I thought, this is the time where I'm going to challenge myself and see, what I can do, right? And I'm so glad, because I think I'm super proud of the work, and I think it came out really well. And I know many people are surprised, like, oh my gosh, you can do this too. I'm surprised too that I've expanded and grown in this direction as well. And hopefully, I don't like being pigeonholed either. It's like a specific category. So I want to continue to expand and see where I go. And then currently now, participating in this program, the Miami Beach Open House. I think it's a great initiative, right, to kind of fill the vacant spaces in Miami Beach. And this is, I think it started last year, but they had to switch gears a little bit, and I can happily say that I installed last week on Friday.
Great. Oh, you did?
Yes, I did, at the South Shore Library in Miami.
Great.
And so it's open, I think, all month long. So if you're in the area, stop by.
It's at South Shore Library?
Yes.
I definitely will check that out. Wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you. So those works were made just for that, and it was fun. And I'm glad I was able to apply. And I think it helps the artists and kind of to engage in culture. And that's pretty much it.
Oh, thank you so much. That was wonderful. So I'm going to open it up to any questions or comments. If anyone would like to ask a comment or question, put it in the chat and I will share it with everyone. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is your studio. What is one item, and I got a sneak peek of your studio, so I see some of the things you work with. What is one of the most indispensable items in your studio right now for what you're working on?
Are we referring to like tools or like an artwork?
Tools or yeah, whatever.
Oh, okay. So I mean, it's hard to pick because you can see I have like a bench top table saw. Behind that, I have a miter saw. Over here, I have like a drill press. It's just kind of hard depending on what I'm working on. I mean, these tools are super helpful. They help make clean works. But I think what I use often is the miter saw. So that's something that I can't live without.
That's your most important work right now?
I think it's the one that I use the most. I think when I'm making my work, the miter saw. For the plexiglass, you can't cut on the miter saw. You have to do it on a table saw. And so, the space is small here, but I have one at home that's bigger, right? So I also use that to cut plexi. So
I like your analogy of the plexiglass and like how we've been using it during the pandemic. It has that extra layer that, we've all surrounded ourselves with it, or we were even making shields with the plastic over our faces. So I think that's very interesting that you made that connection.
well, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was a little off-putting because I thought, wow, now it's like, you could say saving lives, right? To help people maintain social distancing in public. So it was super
and it's
weird.
expensive. You're right. We watched the price of it go up. You're right. Yeah.
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 But I'm still making my work. I think if anything determined, I have strong will. So I always find a way, to make my works, and
I just have somebody stated how much they love your work. Thank you for the presentation. Oh, you can unshare your screen, or what do you call it? Oh, there you are. Perfect. So I wanted to also ask you about do you do any writing about your work? How does that inform your practice?
writing about my work, you know what? Not really. I don't think I do. I think I like talking more about my work. And for example, like I'll give you this example where for Rosie's show, right? If you weren't able to see the show, you can buy the book on Amazon, right?
Oh, great.
But where I kind of wrote my blurb, and then having someone else read it and kind of write kind of an article like on it, which is kind of phenomenal because then I get kind of insight into like how other people perceive the work. So it's kind of one of those things that I'm like open to, right? I can't say that I want someone to fully say like, oh, I understand what this work is about. I don't think it'll happen just because people come from different walks of life, and their experiences, I think, help shape how they perceive and interpret things, right? So it's one of those things that I think is lovely, but I don't know. I don't really write much. Or I guess I do in my sketchbook, my ideas, right? But nothing really like out there, like articles or blogs.
How about, do you think grant writing or proposals? Because you had to write a proposal for.
Oh yes, for all of these works, yeah, I definitely have to write a proposal.
I mean, so that's a form, yeah.
Yes, I think it's same thing. I can't say it's really taught in school because it's like it just depends, right? And it more of like I think a trial and error, right? And this is kind of where I've kind of learned, right? Where I say, this works, this makes sense, and also kind of having people to proofread it, right? Which is great, especially the older artists. I also make it a point to do that as well.
So I don't know if you guys hear, there's somebody vacuuming in the background here. I don't know if you hear that or not. So I wanted to ask you about where are you in for your next exhibition or production? Are you working on another project right now? Where are you in that?
Right now, I'm happy to say I'm kind of doing something else other than art. And I mentioned this to you before, right? Where I'm part of like an archive kind of project.
Oh, that's
It's
right.
called Women Artists Archive Miami, and it's created by Anita Sharma.
I know.
And I think it's absolutely great. She's located in DV Gallery. And I've also been archiving for a few years. I don't think many people know this, right? I've been archiving uh, kind of Rosie's like archiving 25 years of all these artists and like their images and their works at FIU since like 2018. So it's something else that I like to do because you have to be meticulous, right? It's like organized numbers, but it's also kind of giving artists visibility. And I absolutely love that, right? To kind of provide like a counter narrative where like if they weren't given visibility before, we have the opportunity to do so now. And kind of being part of that initiative is great. And so this year I started working with Anita where we are focusing on Karen Rifas, Chado Oket, Barbara Young, and even Lynn Gelfman, which is like my other mentor, like passed away last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been great. So it's kind of other things that I've been working on aside from art making.
Did you know Lynn?
Yes, she was my mentor for 4 years.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. Yeah, she had an exhibition at
The Pam.
Damn, I saw that. Yeah, that was I've never met her, but when she passed away, I heard about that and that. Wow, okay. Now I see where the grids come from.
Absolutely, yes. So I met her when I was in Newell School of the Arts, and I reached out to her, and we hit it off. I would go to her house, and we'd do these kind of critiques where I would take my works to her. So I thought I wanted to get kind of like an outside opinion from my professors, and she was very blunt. I mean, if people who know her, she was very blunt, and she'll tell you like how it is. And I thought that was helpful, just because there was no skin in the game for her, other than whatever she would tell me, what she actually thought. And I found that super helpful. So we did that for a few years, and then I worked on her canvases, stretching canvases and creating the grids for her. Especially as her health deteriorated, I was kind of more involved in her art making.
Really?
Yeah.
So, I was going to ask you about hold on, what I wrote this down and now I can't even read my own writing. Oh, what is the atmosphere that you like to work in your studio? How do you listen to podcasts? Do you listen to music? Do you like silence? How do you work?
I actually do like listening to music. It's gonna sound like weird, but I actually like Korean music, like Korean and K-pop music.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice. So, you know what? I want to ask you, since you were talking about critiques, tell me about critiques. How you obviously thought it was good. You went to Lynn and asked for critiques. You think that's important to get that from your peers? How to take them?
Yes.
I always took them so personal, and I know you're not supposed to take them that way.
Yeah, I mean, I speak to a few artists, especially when it comes to like art programs. You can't talk about an art program and not talk about critiques, right? Honestly, I'm still finding, I haven't found the perfect critique yet. Where, I mean, it's for the artist or the student, it's hard. Like you mentioned, not to take it personal. But I find often that sometimes the professors kind of push their ideas onto the students, right? And I thought like sometimes if they're new to being professors, that's something that I've seen that's like not helpful. And so I guess my advice to some of the students is like, if a professor asks you to kind of make a specific work of art, do it. Be open-minded. Follow their advice, but at the same time, continue to do what you're doing. And something that I learned kind of later on, like I was super frustrated, right? Because I kind of kept going against the grain of what they wanted me to do, and I thought, what's helpful now is like if you were to kind of do what they're asking you to do, but at the same time work on what you're interested in, then there's like a more like fruitful or engaging conversation where you can stand firmly and say, the rest of like I did this, but you know what, it didn't work out. I was thinking about this, and it kind of goes against my idea. It goes against my process, and so this is kind of something that I learned, but like later. But I thought super helpful. But the critiquing is a little bit hard. Where like how do you people say it's also like you're kind of biased, right? And you talk in terms of craft or maybe idea, also depending on what the student says, if there's like a conflict, because sometimes what we say and what we do might not match, right? And so I thought maybe focusing critiques in those areas is kind of helpful. But yeah, it's just different.
I think like you had mentioned when you were in the gallery at the Moore and you heard people talk about your work, right? A bit, and it's nice to hear those positive comments, but then I was also thinking what you said, that you have these informed people that are really experts in their field, trying to give you good advice or teach you, but also standing with what you believe as well. It's that balance of being able to do both of those, to take that critique and also stand your ground on what you think you want to do, right?
Absolutely. I think it's super hard, and especially for me, I was like such a goody two shoes, super shy. So it was kind of like hard.
I think that some people would find it, they would just go right in the one way. And then also, you have to take no, this is what I want to do and I can make it work. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you one good piece of advice that you would give students or emerging artists.
So like apart what I said, about like, when you're doing assignments, continue to do what you're interested in. I want to say that like another thing I think that's super important is kind of community building. I also oftentimes don't see it, especially when I was in New York, I didn't really see that. It was a very like kind of competitive atmosphere. But then when you kind of get out of that, you realize it's like you were in a bubble. And we can debate and say maybe it's because of like the rubric, it's a dedication system, right? It has to do with grading and I don't know. But once you're out of that, you realize how community is super important, right? And it's one of those things that I think learned more so at FIU, also with my mentors like William Cordova and Lynn and Rosie, where like my year, right, it was 2020, all of us were kind of helping each other still, we still keep in contact and nudging each other for opportunities. I think it's super important. That's kind of like the reality, I think, outside of institutions of learning.
I agree. I think the community, being part of the community with your people, that you all are working together and helping each other and supporting, it's really, really important. And I enjoy being part of the community. And I'm looking forward to more face-to-face events.
Absolutely.
Everything getting back to normal again. So, well, Devora, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this. I love your work ever since I first met you, and I was lucky that I ran into you recently and we got to chit-chatting. So I'm going to go ahead and ask everyone to unmute for a second and give you a round of applause. And again,
Good job, girl.
your work is amazing. Yeah, it's so good to see all of you here. Thank you all for joining us.